Konnichiwa! Today we're going to be checking out 7 consoles that Nintendo fans probably never knew existed. Why 7? Because I found 7. Why not 10 or even 5? Really? Just that 7's a weird number. God. Welcome back to the Retro Gamer Boy channel. If you haven't already, make sure you ring the bell below to get your weekly dose of retro gaming goodness. Now in today's show, we're going to be looking at some Nintendo consoles that you may have never heard about. One of the things I really love about doing this channel is discovering new retro gaming consoles and games that I've never heard of. And in today's show, I had a great time finding about some really unique consoles that Nintendo have made but not many people have heard of. First up, we have the Super Famicom Nizao TV SF1. The SF1 was a collaboration between Sharp and Nintendo of Japan, where they took the Super Nintendo and kind of combined it with one of Sharp's TVs. Now the SF1 comes in 2 TV sizes, the 14-inch model and the 21-inch model. And because the Super Nintendo was directly integrated into the TV and connected to the CRTV, the picture quality was actually a lot sharper, especially on the 21-inch model. Now this wasn't the first time that these two companies had partnered together on a TV hybrid model. They'd actually done it before with the Famicom. Now the FS1 had the normal functions that you would expect on a Super Nintendo or a Super Famicom. We had the 2 joypad ports at the bottom, we had reset on there, but you could also use the remote control, the TV remote control, to reset the console as well. The SF1 also included AV output, which means you could connect other Super Nintendo peripherals, but more importantly, you could connect your VHS or Betamax to the TV and record your gameplay.
Because Sony's revolutionary Betamax deck, which hooks up to any TV set, can actually videotape something off one channel while you're watching another channel.
Now, whilst gamers who owned the SF1 benefited from a sharper picture, this was only really true if you had the 21-inch model. And whilst you did have this sharper picture, the SF1 only outputted mono sound. Now the next console we're going to be taking a look at is super cool, and it really just demonstrates how far ahead of the curve Nintendo often is with its console development. Released in 1995, the Nintendo Satellaview was a satellite modem attachment for your Super Nintendo. Now this add-on for the Super Famicom allowed its owners to download games and magazines, but only at a certain time of the day, and only for 1 hour of the day, and it was called the Famicom Hour. Now you also needed a set-top box which you would purchase separately to download the games for the Satellaview. Now in the box you also got a cartridge that looked a lot like the Super Game Boy, which slotted into the top of the Super Famicom. And then on top of the cartridge you put a memory cartridge, which was 8 meg, where all your games would be downloaded and stored. Now something that really surprised me is how the cartridge that slots into the Super Famicom works. It's actually where the OS is stored, the interface for the whole system. And I was really surprised to find out that the OS is much like a modern online game now, in that it has a lobby. Now it doesn't have a 3D lobby where characters are running around, but it does have a 2D lobby where your character moves around a town or a village, and to access the options to play games, look at magazines, look at settings, you actually navigate your character around this little village. How cool is that? This just shows how far ahead Nintendo is. And while we look at a lot of consoles today that weren't commercial successes, what we will see time and time again is how far ahead of the curve Nintendo was with its consoles, and still is. Now pretty much all the games for the Satellaview were unique to the console, including something I really wish I had, and that's the true sequel to A Link to the Past. And it was called The Legend of Zelda: Ancient Stone Tablets. Now, the Color TV series was Nintendo's first ever console release. And unlike most consoles that we see today, and even retro game consoles that we see, this console had the games actually built into it. And so if you wanted new games, you had to wait for a new release of the console. Now, Nintendo's Color TV series was the biggest selling console of Generation 1, which is astounding when you consider the Magnavox Odyssey came out, which was the first console ever, and Atari's Pong. Now, if you want to play some of Nintendo's earliest games on its first console, you don't have to go out and spend all that money on picking up the console and trying to hook it up. You could actually pick up a copy of MarioWare Inc. for your Game Boy Advanced, where you'll find a number of the games included. Now, next up we have the Pokemon Mini, and whilst it's the smallest ever console that Nintendo have ever made, it still packs a real punch. The console looks more like one of the little Tamagotchis you got in the late 90s, but it packs in multiplayer between two consoles, it has rumble features in there, and even to text when the player moves the console.
それは来て震えて対戦できるちっちゃすごい携帯ゲーム機ポケモンミニ先行予約受付中
Tamagotchis also contained the entire game on the device itself, whilst the Pokemon Mini was actually more like our traditional handheld consoles that we're used to seeing from Nintendo, and it included a cartridge slot. Now, the console saw a total of 10 games released for it over its lifetime, all of them Pokemon of course, but there are still some homebrew developers out there creating their own games and applications for it. Now, next up we have a Nintendo console that I've never heard of, and that's the iQue player. Now, the iQue player was a collaboration between iQue and Nintendo to develop a games console that would get around certain Chinese laws concerning video games. The console itself is pretty much an entire N64 shrunk down into a controller. And one of the really cool things about it is to get around the huge amount of piracy that China has. You had to go to a kiosk with a memory card that slotted into the bottom of the joypad and download the game that you wanted. You could then go back, plug it into your joypad and play your game. Now, you could buy an attachment for your iQue player joypad which allowed for multiplayer games, and a large number of Nintendo's first-party games made it onto the system. Games like Mario Kart 64, The Legend of Zelda, The Ocarina of Time, Mario 64, F-Zero X, and a ton of other games on there. Next up we have a console from Nintendo that I have followed since it was first announced, and that's the Nintendo 64DD, or the Nintendo 64 Disk Drive.
今までにない新しい遊びを次々と提案している任天堂64。そしてそれは任天堂64ディスクドライブ。すなわち 64DD の登場でさらに深く面白くなる。自分でゲームを作っていく楽しさを味わえる 64DD.
Now, the 64DD was an attachment for the N64 that made me go out and buy the N64. That and the Ocarina of Time, of course. But it was a console I was super excited for, and was devastated when it was announced that it would only be released in Japan. Now, the console itself sat underneath the N64 and used magnetic discs to store its games. Now, the thing I was really looking forward to at the time was the fact that you could connect your console to the internet. I distinctly remember reading an article, I think it was maybe in Edge or one of the other Nintendo magazines, when Nintendo talked about user-generated content for the first time. It's the first time I'd ever heard that said. Now it's everywhere with Minecraft, Little Big Planet, but at the time Nintendo was suggesting that you could create your own things, your own characters for games, play them in the games, but then share them with other users on the internet. At the time, that just blew my mind. That interaction, that social interaction with people on the other side of the earth, that was the beginning of everything for me. Having that ability to have social interaction with gamers who loved what I loved across the other side of the world was just so exciting at the time. It's just such a pity that the console was released in 1999 and then discontinued in 2001. And at that time, the console only had 10 games available for it. The Famicom Disk System was a console that sat underneath the original Famicom, and it allowed gamers to play original titles on custom floppy disks created by Nintendo. Now, gamers could take these floppy disks to kiosks and actually download new games onto that floppy disk to play. As an add-on console, it was a fairly decent success for Nintendo, being released in 1986 and only discontinued technical support for the console in 2003. Now, whilst most people will know about the Nintendo Famicom Disk System, not a lot of people know about the 3D system. Now, the Nintendo 3D system was capable of playing original 3D titles, but you needed the Famicom Disk System, and of course the 3D system itself. While this is technically not really a console, it's more of a peripheral, it did come with a number of original games for it. Now, the 3D system was released at the same time as the Sega Master System's 3D headset. But unlike the Sega Master System 3D headset, which had a worldwide release, again Nintendo decided to release this system only in Japan. If you'd like to learn more about Nintendo's first attempt at getting into 3D gaming, then you can check out a video that I made about 6 months ago, which talks about its development and the games that were available. Creating today's show was super fun. I love, as a retro gamer, finding about things that I've never heard of before. Too often you kind of get bogged down in the game that you know and you definitely want to get, and you kind of get fixated on that. But to find something new, something you've never heard about, and get excited about it, that's kind of what retro gaming is for me. I really hope you enjoyed today's show. Make sure you leave a comment below. Let me know if there's any consoles that you didn't know about in there, or even consoles that I've not mentioned that you may think other people might not know about. If this is your first visit to the Retro Gamer Boy channel, then why not consider subscribing by clicking on my little pixel head below. And remember, I've got an awesome retro gaming competition where you can win this box of stuff, and I'll put a link up here to where you can see everything that you can win in this awesome box of retroness. And while you're here, you might as well check out some more retro gaming by clicking on either one of these two videos.